Everyone, please welcome Chef Alexander Bernard for the grand unveiling of Lumiere's winter menu. The elegant dining room erupted in applause as Chef Bernard strutted through the double doors, his tall white toque perfectly starched, his chef's coat pristine without a single splatter. He beamed at the assembled food critics, investors, and social media influencers, soaking in adoration like a sauce reduced to its essence. I watched from the corner of the kitchen, arms folded across my flour-dusted apron, as he described his masterpiece winter menu in exquisite detail. The seared scallops with brown butter espuma and winter truffle, the sous-vide venison with juniper berry reduction, the deconstructed black forest gâteau with cherry smoke and chocolate soil. My creations, every single one. My name is Mai Lin, and for the past 2 years, I've been the invisible engine behind Lumiere's meteoric rise from just another upscale Manhattan restaurant to a 2 Michelin star sensation. Not that anyone outside the kitchen would know it. The inspiration for this menu, Alexander announced, swirling a glass of expensive Bordeaux, came to me during my recent travels through rural France and Japan. The fusion of techniques, the balance of flavors. This is the culmination of my 20 years of culinary vision. I had to give him credit for one thing: the man could lie with impressive confidence. His recent travels consisted of Instagram photos taken at the airport lounge before flying home after 2 days of schmoozing investors. Meanwhile, I had spent 3 months developing these dishes, testing each component until my fingers cramped and my back ached from 14-hour days hunched over the pass. The winter black truffle, freshly harvested from the Perigord region, is shaved tableside, he continued, nodding to the servers who began presenting the first course to the enraptured audience. I slipped back into the kitchen, where the real magic was happening. My team, because despite the restaurant's formal hierarchy, they were my team, moved with practiced precision. Jake manned the meat station, Lucia handled sauces, and Tom's assembled the delicate plate presentations I had designed. "How's the bullshit festival going out there?" Lucia muttered as she perfectly quenelled a dollop of celery root puree. "Standing ovation for Chef's vision," I replied, making air quotes with my flour-dusted fingers. Apparently, he's been very inspired by his imaginary travels. One day you should just, Jake began. I know. I cut him off, having heard this argument countless times. Stand up, claim credit, expose the fraud. And then what? Watch Alexander use his connections to blackball me across the industry? No thanks. What my well-meaning colleagues didn't understand was that I had a plan. One that required patience. 2 years of patience to be exact. I hadn't always been the shadow executive chef at Lumiere. My journey began at the Culinary Institute of America, where I graduated top of my class. That should have launched me into a promising career. But the high-end culinary world had other ideas. Too short for the line, one Michelin-starred chef had said during an interview, as if my 5'2" frame would somehow affect my ability to create exquisite food. Our clientele expects a certain image, another had explained delicately, his eyes sliding away from my distinctly Asian features. Then there was the ever-popular, "We're really looking for someone with a more classical background," which somehow always translated to male and European. After a dozen such rejections, I found myself taking a position at Lumiere as a line cook, several ranks below my qualifications. The executive chef at the time was Andrew Dupont, a reasonably talented but uninspired cook who relied heavily on classic French techniques without innovation. Restaurant critics described the food as competent but forgettable. When Andrew suffered a stress-induced heart attack 8 months into my tenure, sous chef Alexander Bernard was promoted to executive chef. It quickly became apparent that Alexander's talents lay in self-promotion rather than cooking. Dishes were sent back. Reviews began to sour. The owner, Maximilian Weiss, was panicking about his investment. That's when I made my first strategic move. "Chef," I had approached Alexander cautiously, "I have some ideas that might help with the soufflé issue." "The soufflés are fine," he had snapped, despite the fact that 3 had collapsed just that evening. Of course, I had replied, keeping my voice deferential. "But I studied a technique at CIA that might be more consistent, if you're interested." His ego properly massaged, Alexander had allowed me to assist with the soufflé recipe. When the perfectly risen, cloud-like desserts earned compliments from that night's diners, Alexander was quick to take credit. And so began our unspoken arrangement. I would quietly solve problems, develop dishes, and elevate the menu. Alexander would claim the spotlight. With every successful dish, I gained a little more freedom in the kitchen. Within 6 months, I was effectively running culinary operations while Alexander glad-handed diners and posed for photos. A year in, Lumiere received its first Michelin star. Tonight, with the launch of the winter menu I had spent months perfecting, critics were already whispering about a possible second star. Alexander's star, of course. Never mine. But that was about to change. As the kitchen executed the final dessert course, I discreetly checked my phone. A text from my attorney. All documents received. Proceeding as discussed. Perfect timing. I had been planning this moment since the day Alexander first took credit for my chocolate soufflé. Every recipe I created, every technique I developed, every menu item I conceived. All meticulously documented, time-stamped, and secretly filed with my attorney. Video recordings of me developing the dishes in my home kitchen, dated emails to myself detailing the concepts, even a private journal with sketches of plate presentations. For 2 years, I had built an ironclad case proving that I was the true culinary genius behind Lumiere's transformation. But documentation alone wasn't enough. I needed leverage, opportunity, and perfect timing. As fate would have it, all three converged tonight. The dining room doors swung open, and Maximilian Weiss entered the kitchen, beaming with pride at the success of the event. Behind him followed an elegant woman in her 50s whom I recognized immediately, Camille Laurent, the notoriously demanding restaurant critic for Le Monde and one of the most influential voices in global gastronomy. Alexander, magnificent menu, Maximilian boomed. Camille wishes to offer her compliments to the chef. Alexander materialized instantly, wiping his completely clean hands on a towel for theatrical effect. Madame Laurent, what an honor. Camille's shrewd eyes took in the kitchen scene. The venison was exceptional, a perfect balance of tradition and innovation. Who prepared it? I did, of course, Alexander replied smoothly, a technique I developed during my time in. Jake handled the venison station tonight. I interrupted quietly, nodding toward the lanky cook who was currently cleaning his station. Camille's gaze shifted to Jake, then back to Alexander, one eyebrow raised slightly. Under my direction, naturally, Alexander amended quickly. I oversee every dish. And the truffle espuma? Camille asked. So light, yet intensely flavored. A difficult technique to master. One of my signatures, Alexander claimed. The secret is in the temperature control and timing. Lucia created the espuma, I corrected just loud enough to be heard. She's been perfecting the technique for weeks. The kitchen had gone unnaturally quiet. Even Maximilian looked confused, unused to hearing me speak up in such situations. Camille turned to me fully now, her experienced eyes assessing. And you are? Lin, senior line cook. I extended my hand, which she shook firmly. Senior line cook, she repeated thoughtfully. Tell me, Mademoiselle Lin, who conceived the deconstructed Black Forest dessert? It was unlike any interpretation I've encountered. Alexander opened his mouth, but I spoke first. That was my creation, Madame Laurent, as was the venison dish, the truffle espuma, and in fact, every item on tonight's menu. I maintained eye contact with the critic, ignoring Alexander's sputtering and Maximilian's wide-eyed alarm. How interesting, Camille replied, a small smile playing at her lips. Because Chef Bernard has been quite detailed in interviews about his creative process for these exact dishes. I'm sure he has, I agreed pleasantly, just as I'm sure he'd struggle to explain the actual technique behind any of them. This is absurd, Alexander interjected, his face flushing red. Mai is a competent line cook, but she's clearly seeking attention with these ridiculous claims. Then you won't mind a small demonstration, Camille suggested, her tone making it clear this wasn't really a request. Perhaps you could both explain the technique for the cherry smoke component. It was quite extraordinary. Alexander's confident facade cracked slightly. The cherry smoke is a proprietary technique that cherry pits are toasted until just before burning. I cut in, then combined with cherry wood chips in a controlled smoke chamber. The smoke is captured in a glass cloche and infused with a splash of kirsch, that's been reduced with star anise and vanilla. The cloche is sealed until service, allowing the flavors to marry but preventing the smoke from becoming bitter. The kitchen staff had abandoned any pretense of working. Everyone was watching this unprecedented confrontation unfold. Camille nodded. And the chocolate soil? It had an unusual texture, crumbly yet melts instantly on the tongue. Alexander jumped in. A combination of cocoa and tempered guanaja chocolate is freeze-dried, then pulverized with maltodextrin and a touch of sea salt, I stated. The maltodextrin creates the dissolving effect while maintaining the soil-like appearance. Camille turned to Alexander, challenge in her eyes. Would you care to demonstrate the preparation of either component, Chef Bernard? The silence that followed was deafening. This is all very theatrical, Maximilian interjected nervously, but perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. An excellent suggestion, I agreed, pulling out my phone. In fact, I've prepared some materials that might help clarify the situation. Mr. Weiss, would you mind checking your email? My attorney should have sent you something approximately. I glanced at the time, 12 minutes ago. Maximilian frowned but pulled out his phone. His expression shifted from confusion to shock as he scrolled through whatever he was seeing. What is this? He demanded. Documentation proving that I am the creator of not only tonight's menu but every signature dish Lumiere has served for the past 2 years, I replied calmly. Videos of me developing the recipes, dated emails, journal entries, and testimonials from kitchen staff. My attorney has also submitted application for copyright protection on my recipe collection, which includes everything currently on Lumiere's menu. Alexander's face had gone from red to ashen. You can't copyright recipes, he blustered, though with noticeably less confidence. Individual ingredients and basic instructions, no, I conceded. But original collections, detailed techniques, and creative expressions are indeed protected by intellectual property law, something my attorney has been very thorough about. I turned back to Maximilian, whose expression had morphed from shock to calculation. He was, after all, a businessman first. Mr. Weiss, I've valued my time at Lumiere, but I can no longer allow my work to be claimed by someone else. I'm prepared to leave, taking my recipes and techniques with me, or we can discuss a new arrangement that properly acknowledges my contributions. I didn't outline the new arrangement I had in mind. I didn't need to. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. Camille Laurent, who had been watching this drama unfold with evident fascination, finally spoke. Mr. Weiss, if I may offer an observation, the culinary world values authenticity above all. Whatever you decide here will certainly become public knowledge, as I suspect Mademoiselle Lin has ensured. She was right. My attorney had prepared press releases that would go to every major food publication by morning if necessary. Maximilian looked between Alexander, whose bluster had deflated into sullen silence, and me standing calmly with 2 years of receipts, both figurative and literal. Perhaps we should continue this in my office, he suggested. Of course, I agreed, though I believe Madame Laurent deserves to hear the resolution, given that she's been served food under false pretenses. The meeting in Maximilian's office was brief and decisive. Presented with irrefutable evidence and the very real threat of public embarrassment, not to mention potential legal action, he made the only rational choice. Alexander was out. I was in. By midnight, I had signed a new contract as executive chef of Lumiere, with creative control, proper compensation, and comprehensive credit for my culinary creations. Alexander left with security escorting him, still protesting that I had somehow stolen his ideas, though he couldn't explain any of the techniques behind them. As the restaurant finally emptied, I found myself alone in the kitchen, my kitchen now, officially. I ran my hand along the cool stainless steel countertop, allowing myself a moment to savor the victory. Camille Laurent appeared in the doorway. I suspected something wasn't quite right at Lumiere, she said without preamble. Bernard speaks eloquently about food, but his eyes lack the understanding of someone who truly creates. Yours do not. Thank you for the intervention, I replied. Your presence created the perfect opportunity. I merely asked questions. You had already orchestrated everything else quite masterfully. She studied me with newfound respect. 2 years is a long time to work in the shadows. The best dishes require patience, I said simply. She nodded in acknowledgement. I look forward to seeing what you create now that you're stepping into the light, Chef Lin. Chef Lin. The title I had earned twice over, once through culinary skill and again through strategic patience. The next morning, the culinary world awoke to breaking news. Social media exploded with the dramatic story of Lumiere's sudden change in leadership. Food publications scrambled to update their previous coverage, now correctly attributing the restaurant's acclaimed dishes to their actual creator. Some former colleagues reached out with congratulations. Others contacted me for jobs, sensing that Lumiere, under my official leadership, would continue its upward trajectory. A few rival chefs, particularly those who had rejected my applications years earlier, were notably silent. 6 weeks later, Michelin awarded Lumiere its second star, this time with my name attached. The citation specifically mentioned the authentic vision and technical mastery of Chef Mai Lin. The winter menu, now properly credited, became the most sought-after reservation in Manhattan. Waiting lists extended months. Critics wrote glowing reviews that often included some variation of the true talent at Lumiere has finally been recognized. As for Alexander Bernard, he found himself suddenly unwelcome in the kitchens where he had once been celebrated. His reputation, built entirely on the work of others, collapsed like a failed soufflé. Last I heard, he was teaching basic cooking classes at a recreational school in New Jersey. On the 1-year anniversary of my promotion to executive chef, Maximilian hosted a private dinner celebrating Lumiere's continued success. The restaurant now boasted a third Michelin star, the youngest establishment in New York to achieve such an honor. After the guests had gone, Maximilian found me in the kitchen, inspecting tomorrow's mise en place. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, leaning against the counter. "You had everything documented, planned to perfection. You could have exposed Alexander at any time. Why wait 2 years?" I smiled, remembering all those nights of quiet documentation, of building my case while simultaneously building Lumiere's reputation. 3 reasons, I replied, wiping down my workspace. First, I needed to establish a clear pattern showing that I was the consistent creative force behind every successful dish. 1 or 2 recipes might be dismissed as collaboration. 2 years' worth is irrefutable. Maximilian nodded. And second, I needed Lumiere to be successful enough that you had more to lose by keeping Alexander than by promoting me. If I'd made my move too early, you might have simply replaced us both and started over. Smart, he admitted. And the third reason? I met his gaze directly. I needed to be underestimated for my plan to work. The moment someone recognized my true value, they would have either promoted me, ruining my documentation of Alexander's fraud, or seen me as a threat and forced me out. Being invisible was my greatest advantage. Maximilian considered this, then raised his glass. To visibility, then. To visibility, I agreed, earned on my terms. The culinary world loves a meteoric rise, the sudden appearance of a brilliant new chef who transforms the landscape overnight. Few understand that sometimes what appears to be an overnight success is actually years of careful preparation, of calculated patience, of working quietly while others take the spotlight. They also underestimate the power of documentation, how meticulously preserved evidence can transform years of theft into the perfect recipe for justice. These days, I still wear an apron dusted with flour, but I no longer hide in the corners of my kitchen. My name is on the menu, on the door, and on the reservations that diners make months in advance. When food critics and celebrities request to meet the chef, it's my face they see, my hands that created their meal, my vision they experience. Sometimes during service, I catch glimpses of new line cooks watching me with the same hunger I once had, not just for culinary success, but for recognition, for the chance to be seen. I make a point of learning their names, of tasting their ideas, of giving credit where it's due, because the most important lesson I learned wasn't about patience or documentation or strategic timing, though all those were critical to my success. It was that talent deserves recognition, whether it comes wrapped in a traditional package or not. And that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loud, strutting peacock demanding attention. It's the quiet one in the corner, carefully taking notes, patiently biding their time, the one nobody sees until it's too late.